Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Teeter, and on today's Teeter Tales, I'm going to be doing a review of Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. Till We Have Faces is an adult fiction novel that is a retelling of the Greek myth of Cupid and Psyche. For this review, I will be touching on a few light spoilers, but I'll try and keep that as few and far between as I can. If you want to go to specific parts of the review, you can find chapters for that in the description. Let's go ahead and get started. Though this book is a retelling of Psyche's myth, Lewis chooses to have his protagonist be Orwell, Psyche's older half sister. The book begins with an elderly Orwell informing the reader that this book is her complaint against the gods. Thus, the book is written by Orwell to tell the reader her own story of how both she and Psyche have suffered at the hands of the gods. Psyche is beautiful and Orwell ugly, and yet they both face hardships throughout the novel as they live two very different lives as daughters of a cruel king. I will admit, I have not read much of Lewis's work. I've really only read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I read that series years ago. So I wasn't sure what to expect from Till We Have Faces, especially as an adult novel. I was not disappointed. The entire book is written from the perspective of Orwell looking back on her life. Lewis captures his protagonist's voice very well. Orwell's writing, often by its very nature, is very contemplative, and she considers what it means to be a woman in a society where women are looked down upon. She also often considers how she does not feel that she is fully woman because of how she is treated differently because of her ugliness. The genuine tones of Lewis's writing were astounding, and if I didn't know better, I would have thought that this book was written by a woman. He really did capture Orwell and her voice fantastically. As is to be expected of Lewis, the book is also thematically heavy, but that actually adds to the story rather than detracting from it. Since Orwell is nearing the end of her life as she writes this, she's looking back on all of the events and trying to make sense of everything. She wonders at the silence of the gods, how she has treated those she loves, and also how she has had to bury herself to become who she feels she has to be. Lewis does not present just clear black and white morals, he presents ideas and lets the characters and in turn the readers grapple with those ideas. Lewis is able to take a mythological story and blend it with philosophical questioning to hauntingly beautiful effect. Till We Have Faces is just as much about understanding Orwell as a character as it is about understanding the nature of the divine and of the human. Orwell is a deeply complex character with intense struggles and flaws. Even when Orwell is coming to conclusions about herself, the reader is still left with such a complicated picture of this character. Orwell is probably one of the most intriguing characters I have encountered in fiction in recent years. However, she's not the only fleshed out character within this book. Characters like the fox, the priest, and Bardia all have their own unique stories and motivations. I found myself caring about the side characters just as much as Orwell, even as she told me from the very beginning that this story would be tragic. I was especially fond of Bardia as I read, as he felt like almost a comfort character throughout the novel. Even the portrayals of these other side characters tell us more about Orwell, since this is supposed to be her writing. We see the very talkative, rambling lesson side of the fox and understand that that is what has most impressed itself on Orwell's memory. We also trust Bardia because Orwell trusts him. And Psyche is this perfect angel that lets us understand more about Orwell and her relationship with her half sister. Just as the themes of Lewis's novel are rich, so are all of the characters that he writes. It's actually kind of hard to talk about the plot of this story without spoiling most of it, so I'll focus more on the pacing for this section. I never found myself bored with this book. In fact, for how heavy it is thematically, this was a pretty quick read. The overarching plot is essentially the life of Orwell, which Lewis easily maintains interest in, despite covering so much time. The book understands when it's best to slow down and give us some of Orwell's everyday life and her thoughts, and when it needs to speed up and maybe skip several years to get to some more interesting events. Even when it gets very philosophical and we have long inner monologues from Orwell, I was very invested and engaged. There is a reason Till We Have Faces is regarded as adult fiction. There may be some who will see that this is a C.S. Lewis book and assume that it's family friendly, but it is very much not. There is a lot of content that you have to deal with when you read this book, and I'll go ahead and break down what some of those are. The element that might be most surprising to the readers is the pagan aspect of this story. This is a retelling of a Greek myth, and thus Greek gods and goddesses all play a very central role in this narrative. This can lead to some very dark imagery and scenes, such as the Temple of Aphrodite, who's referred to as Unga in this story, having both animal and human sacrifices that leave the floor and walls covered in blood. It's also mentioned that slave girls are kept there as a sort of sexual ornament to the temple and the priest. Orwell will often describe things such as terrible holiness or the dark and holy. So the gods are seen as this figure of fear that use humans and their lives to their own satisfaction. However, there are also contrasting moments where the gods are bright and inconceivably beautiful, so that Orwell has to grapple with whether they're terrible or if it's her that is terrible. The latter portion of the book is filled with visions of ghosts and gods and other scary images. Some might expect Lewis to have some mention of Christianity, at least by the end of this book, but he very much keeps the story centered within the pagan religion that this story is set in. There's also a great deal of sexual content in this book. While no explicit scenes occur, there are pretty frequent mentions of men being punished by castration or women losing their virginity. Women are given over as brides or sexual sacrifices to both men and gods. Orwell will also think about what it would be like to be sexually and romantically loved by a man. Characters will mention lying in bed with other characters. There are also a few instances of marital unfaithfulness. Early in the book, Orwell's father actually has a young woman brought into his palace as his new wife, and it's mentioned that she is terrified and only a little older than Orwell, but is brought into his bedchamber immediately and is quickly pregnant. Women will also be referred to with a variety of crude and derogatory terms, typically men referring to women. Violence appears sporadically, but can be pretty visceral and bloody when it does appear. A few moments have Orwell describing how stabbings and slashings will either hit or miss large blood vessels, resulting in bleeding out. And a particularly visceral moment was when Orwell describes a dagger sticking all the way through a person's arm. Orwell's father is also abusive, both physically and verbally, to her, and it can be really hard and disturbing to read him beat her to unconsciousness or call her ugly to her face. Suicide also pops up in discussions not infrequently, and a few characters try to commit suicide but change their minds at the last minute. Men will often get drunk, and at one point even Orwell will start drinking to deal with her grief. Till We Have Faces is not a light read by any means. Lewis does not back down from really hard concepts and tries to challenge the reader to think about this novel even once you've finished reading. However, this book does not feel preachy or fail to do justice to its themes like many books do, and the themes and the story play equal parts in contributing to a fantastic novel. Orwell is one of the most thought-provoking characters I have ever encountered in fiction, and the entire book practically begs to be dissected and discussed. This is not a book I would recommend to everyone. It's definitely not for kids or squeamish readers, but it is a treasure trove of good writing and engaging ideas for those who are up for the challenge. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who enjoys retellings of myths, thematically rich stories, and character-driven narratives. I hope you enjoyed this review of Till We Have Faces and that you'll consider reading the book. I know I'm planning on looking into some more of Lewis's books after reading this. Bye!